Clara had always thought her life was steady, predictable, and safe, a life where every morning followed the same routine, where the comfort of her marriage with David wrapped around her like a familiar blanket, and yet, as she poured her first cup of coffee that chilly Monday morning, she couldn't shake the strange feeling that something was about to change. She loved David, of course she did. He was reliable, thoughtful, and steady in a way that many people admired, but lately, she had felt a quiet emptiness, a subtle yearning for something she couldn't quite name, a tiny flicker in her heart that seemed to grow every time she walked past the office where she spent her days. Work had always been just a place to earn a living, to complete projects, meet deadlines, and manage the endless flow of emails and meetings, but over the past few months, it had begun to feel like more than that, like a place where her thoughts wandered, where she found herself lingering over conversations with people who made her laugh, who listened to her ideas and encouraged her in ways that felt alive. And then there was Liam, a new coworker who had joined the team quietly, with an easy smile and a warm presence, someone who seemed to notice the small details about her, like how she liked her coffee black with a dash of cinnamon, how she hummed softly to herself when concentrating, how her hands shook ever so slightly when she was nervous about a presentation. At first, Clara told herself it was harmless, that it was just the polite kindness of a coworker, the simple camaraderie of working late together on a project, sharing small jokes and laughter over spreadsheets and reports. But something in the way Liam looked at her, the way his eyes softened when he asked if she was okay after a long day, stirred something she hadn't felt in years, something electric and unfamiliar that made her pulse quicken without her permission. She tried to push the feeling aside, to focus on David, to remind herself of the life they had built together, but every evening, as she drove home past the familiar streets lined with trees and lights, she found her thoughts drifting, replaying conversations with Liam, imagining what it would be like to share a quiet moment over coffee or a late-night walk to the corner store, imagining the thrill of someone noticing her in a way that went beyond routine. It wasn't that she wanted to hurt David, far from it, but the heart is unpredictable, and sometimes it leads you down paths you didn't intend to take, and Clara felt herself standing at the edge of one of those paths without realizing it. One rainy evening, the office nearly empty, Clara and Liam stayed behind to finish a report for a client, the sound of rain tapping softly against the windows filling the silence, and as they worked side by side, Liam reached over to adjust a paper on her desk, and their hands brushed, a fleeting contact that sent warmth rushing through Clara's chest. She quickly pulled her hand back, her cheeks flushed, but when she looked up, Liam was smiling, a gentle, knowing smile that made her stomach flutter and her mind spin. They laughed quietly, pretending the moment hadn't happened, but the air between them had shifted, charged with something neither could ignore, a quiet tension that was thrilling and terrifying at the same time. Clara drove home that night in a haze, the rain streaking her windshield, her thoughts tangled between loyalty and longing, between the man she loved and the spark she hadn't realized she was missing. David was waiting for her, as he always was, with a warm smile and a question about her day, and Clara found herself smiling back, but the words felt hollow, like a costume she wore to hide the storm inside her, and when he reached out to take her hand, she pulled away just slightly, feeling a pang of guilt that made her stomach twist. She told herself she would figure it out, that she would not act on feelings she didn't understand, that this was just a momentary distraction, yet deep down, she knew the distraction had roots, had grown silently, steadily, until it threatened to uproot everything she had built. In the following days, Clara found herself lingering at the office later than necessary, finding excuses to run into Liam in the hallway, to ask him questions about work, to laugh at small jokes that seemed to mean more than they should, and every time she did, her heart raced and a knot of fear and excitement tightened in her chest. She began noticing the small ways he looked at her, the way his brow furrowed when he wanted to understand her better, the way he seemed genuinely interested in the stories she shared about her weekend, about her childhood memories, about the little things that made her who she was. She told herself stories about why this was okay, why it was harmless, why she could admire someone without acting on feelings, but the truth was, admiration had a way of growing into something more, something that clawed at the edges of the mind and refused to be ignored. Her evenings were spent replaying tiny moments, the way Liam had remembered the coffee she liked, The way he had quietly left a note on her desk to encourage her before an important meeting, the way he had complimented her ideas in a team discussion, and each moment added fuel to the fire of a curiosity she hadn't known existed, a longing she hadn't dared to name. Meanwhile, David continued with his steady routine, asking how her day was, sharing stories from his own work, offering gentle smiles and quiet gestures of love that made Clara ache with guilt, because she knew he would never suspect the storm brewing inside her, the pull of something forbidden, the emotional energy she spent thinking about Liam instead of the life she had promised to protect. One late night, as Clara left the office after everyone had gone, Liam called out to her, asking if she needed a ride, and she found herself accepting without thinking, grateful for the company. And as they drove through the empty streets with rain shimmering under the streetlights, they talked about everything and nothing, about hopes, fears, small personal stories that made them feel closer than they should. At a red light, Clara glanced at him, and he looked back, their eyes locking for a heartbeat that felt endless, a shared understanding passing between them that neither spoke aloud. She knew it was dangerous, that she was stepping into a world of emotional risk, but the warmth of his presence, the way he listened, the way he made her feel alive again, was intoxicating, and she couldn't stop herself from craving it. By the time she reached home, David was waiting, as always, his voice warm and familiar, asking about her day, and Clara forced a smile, her lips trembling slightly as she muttered the usual responses, hiding the storm within, hiding the racing heartbeat that betrayed her thoughts. She went to bed that night feeling torn, the line between right and wrong blurred, the comfort of her marriage weighed against the excitement of a new connection, and she realized, with a quiet dread and thrill all at once, that nothing would ever feel quite the same again. And as she drifted into a restless sleep, the image of Liam's smile, the gentle touch of his hand, and the spark she could not extinguish danced in her mind, a reminder that life sometimes changes in the smallest, quietest moments, moments that seem harmless until they are not, and Clara knew, deep down, that her life was standing at the edge of a choice, a path that could lead to heartbreak, joy, or regret, but the pull of the unknown was irresistible, and the first step had already been taken. The days that followed became a whirlwind for Clara, each morning starting with the same tension she tried to ignore, a mixture of anticipation and guilt that followed her into the office, where Liam's presence seemed to pull her attention effortlessly, making her laugh at jokes she would have normally ignored, linger longer in conversations, and feel the warmth of someone noticing her in ways she hadn't felt. For years, every time he smiled or asked how she was, her heart jumped, a spark she hadn't expected now burning brighter, and yet, the quiet fear of discovery tugged at the corners of her mind, reminding her that what she felt was fragile, precarious, and complicated, a dangerous dance between longing and loyalty, between desire and responsibility. She found herself staying late more often, pretending projects required her attention, yet secretly hoping for small moments with Liam, sitting together in an empty office, sharing stories about family, dreams, and ambitions, and with each laugh, each shared glance, Clara felt her heart open to possibilities she had never allowed herself to consider, the monotony of her life suddenly disrupted by a connection that was thrilling and frightening all at once. She noticed little things about him, the way he hummed quietly when he concentrated, the way his eyes softened when she shared a memory, the way he seemed genuinely interested in every little detail of her day, and each small gesture felt like a thread pulling her further into a web of emotions she could not untangle, a web that promised excitement but carried the weight of potential heartbreak. David's presence at home, once comforting, now felt distant, a reminder of stability that she couldn't deny but also couldn't fully embrace, because her mind and heart were caught in a tug-of-war, pulled in two directions, between the man she loved for years and the man who made her feel alive again. Clara's thoughts became consumed with Liam, each message from him making her pulse quicken, each laugh echoing in her mind long after he had gone, each conversation a delicate mix of friendship and something more, something unspoken but unmistakable, a tension that neither dared to name but both felt with clarity. She found herself imagining what it would be like to spend an entire evening with him outside of work, to walk together through quiet streets, to share secrets in hushed tones, to feel the warmth of a hand brushing hers. And every fantasy was both thrilling and guilt-inducing, because she knew David's love was patient, kind, and steady, yet it did not stir the same rush of emotion, the same undeniable electricity that Liam evoked. One afternoon, during a team meeting, Liam's eyes met hers across the conference room, and she felt the familiar flutter, her pulse racing in a way that made concentrating on the agenda nearly impossible, and as she tried to focus, she realized that her heart was no longer hers alone, that it had been quietly claimed by someone she hadn't intended to fall for, someone who made her laugh, feel understood, and wanted in a way that felt dangerously intoxicating. That evening, as they stayed behind to finish a presentation together, the office empty and bathed in the soft glow of desk lamps, their conversation drifted from work to personal stories, to hopes and fears, and Clara felt the boundaries blur, the line between professional and personal fading as she realized how deeply she was drawn to him, to his gentle attentiveness and quiet humor. Liam leaned slightly closer while explaining a slide, his voice calm and reassuring, and Clara felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the office heaters, a pull she couldn't deny, a longing that made her heart ache and her thoughts spin with confusion and excitement all at once. She told herself repeatedly that this was fleeting, that she could control her feelings, that she was loyal to David and would never act on anything, but each time Liam laughed, each time he remembered a small detail about her, each time he looked at her with an intensity that made her stomach flutter, Clara felt the defenses she had built around her heart begin to crumble, leaving her vulnerable to emotions she hadn't fully explored in years. The next few days were a delicate balancing act, walking the line between her life with David and the magnetic pull of Liam, each encounter leaving her heart racing, her mind filled with imagined scenarios of what could happen, while guilt shadowed every thought, reminding her that choices have consequences, that love is not only about passion but about trust, commitment, and care, and yet the temptation of what she felt with Liam made the weight of those reminders feel almost unbearable. Clara noticed the way her friends at work observed the subtle changes in her behavior, the quick smiles exchanged with Liam, the quiet moments of laughter that lingered longer than normal, and though no one voiced suspicion, she felt the invisible threads of attention tighten, like a reminder that secrets have a way of making themselves known, and that the heart's impulses, no matter how gentle, often come with a price. Late one night, when the office was nearly deserted, Clara and Liam found themselves working side by side on a challenging project, the glow of computer screens illuminating their focused faces, and as they reached simultaneously for a pen, their fingers touched, sending a jolt through Clara that made her gasp softly, a sound caught in her throat, and Liam's eyes met hers with a knowing smile, a silent acknowledgement that both understood the tension between them, an unspoken bond that was thrilling, terrifying, and impossible to ignore. She pulled her hand back, trying to focus on the work, yet her mind refused to comply, replaying the fleeting contact over and over, imagining what it would feel like if the moment had lasted longer, if the boundaries they had unconsciously respected were crossed, and she felt a mix of exhilaration and guilt that left her breathless and restless. Driving home that night, rain tapping gently against the windshield, Clara's thoughts were a tangled web of longing, fear, and excitement, as she pictured moments she had never allowed herself to consider, whispered conversations, laughter shared in quiet corners, hands brushing unintentionally, hearts beating in sync, all while knowing that the life she returned to each night was one of love, stability, and devotion, a life that she risked every time she allowed herself to indulge in these thoughts. David greeted her with a warm smile, asking about her day, sharing his own mundane stories with that easy patience she had always admired, yet Clara felt a pang of sorrow and guilt, knowing that she was carrying a secret in her heart, a secret that could unravel the trust and warmth of their life together, a secret that could change everything if ever revealed. She tried to immerse herself in the conversation, to laugh genuinely, to nod and respond with care, but her mind wandered repeatedly to Liam, to his quiet attentiveness, to the thrill of feeling noticed and appreciated in ways she had long forgotten, and the conflict within her heart grew sharper, a tug-of-war between passion and loyalty, excitement and responsibility. Over the next few days, Clara found herself in moments that were small yet potent, a shared coffee break where Liam remembered an offhand comment she had made days ago, a laugh exchanged over a silly office incident, a moment of quiet understanding as they discussed the pressures of their workloads, and each time, the invisible thread between them grew taut, pulling her heart further into a space she hadn't intended to occupy, a space where longing and restraint collided, leaving her both exhilarated and anxious. At home, the comfort of David's presence was now tinged with sadness, because every gesture reminded her of the choice she had not yet made, the path she hadn't yet acknowledged, and the growing awareness that she was no longer entirely present in her own life, that a part of her heart had already wandered into forbidden territory. One evening, as Clara and Liam stayed late to finalize a presentation, the tension between them became undeniable, each glance loaded with meaning, each smile lingering longer than necessary, and when Liam casually brushed her hand while pointing to a chart, Clara felt a heat rise through her chest, a silent acknowledgement that neither of them could deny what was quietly growing, a connection that was thrilling, intoxicating, and utterly consuming. The emotional stakes climbed higher with every interaction, each text exchanged after work, each thoughtful message, each shared joke, each moment of connection, leaving Clara caught in a whirlwind of emotion, unable to focus solely on her life with David, unable to ignore the spark that Liam had ignited, and yet terrified of the consequences that might come if her heart betrayed the life she had promised to protect. That night, as she lay awake, memories of the day replayed endlessly, Liam's smile, the touch of his hand, the warmth in his voice, the effortless way he made her feel alive, and she realized that her heart was no longer hers alone, that it had been quietly captivated, and that the choices she made in the coming days could reshape everything she had known about love, loyalty, and desire, leaving her standing on the precipice of a decision that could bring joy, heartbreak, or regret, a decision that she was now powerless to ignore. The days after Clara had finally allowed herself to embrace the feelings she had long tried to ignore became a chaotic blur of exhilaration and unease, a whirlwind of emotions she hadn't anticipated and a series of moments that left her heart both full and heavy, because being with Liam, even in small ways, brought a rush of joy and connection that she had never felt before, yet at the same time, the consequences of her choices loomed over her like a shadow she couldn't shake, and each time she returned home to David, she felt the weight of the life she was leaving behind pressing down on her chest, a reminder that love was not only about excitement but also about loyalty, trust, and care, all of which she had compromised without fully realizing how irreversible her actions could be. At first, the thrill of being with Liam felt intoxicating, each shared smile, every conversation filled with laughter, each look that lingered too long, became a secret treasure, a private world she and he occupied in between the routine of office hours and the reality of her home life, and in that private world, she felt alive in ways she hadn't felt in years, as if a part of her that had been dormant had suddenly awakened, stretching and yearning for connection. She began to notice the way he would remember tiny details about her, the way he would adjust a sentence in a report to match her preference without being asked, the subtle way his presence seemed to anticipate her needs before she even spoke. And all these small gestures accumulated, making her heart swell with emotions that were thrilling yet terrifying because she knew every moment carried the risk of exposure, of heartbreak, and of permanent loss. Meanwhile, the life she returned to each evening with David grew increasingly complicated in her mind, his warm smiles, his quiet acts of care, the soft patience in his voice, all of it reminded her of what she was risking, of a steady love that had stood the test of years. Yet she could not deny that her heart had wandered, that a new, intense feeling had taken root, and that the choice she had made to indulge it had consequences that were already beginning to show. Clara's days became a delicate balancing act, navigating between the man she loved and the man who made her feel alive, and with every encounter, she felt a growing tension between desire and responsibility, between longing and regret, and it became harder to distinguish between right and wrong because her heart had found a new rhythm, a new excitement that pulled her in directions she had never intended to explore. One afternoon, as she and Liam stayed late at the office to prepare a presentation, the empty building around them seemed to heighten every glance, every smile, every small gesture, as if the walls themselves were conspiring to make the connection undeniable, and when Liam leaned slightly closer to point at a detail on the screen, Clara felt the familiar warmth rise through her chest, a thrill that was accompanied immediately by guilt, because she knew David would never forgive the betrayal if he understood how completely her heart had shifted, and yet, she could not turn away from the feelings that had been awakened. In the following weeks, the emotional intensity between them grew, shared lunches turned into lingering conversations, casual touches became moments she could not forget, and each text sent after work hours carried more weight than she realized, weaving a web of connection that was as intoxicating as it was dangerous, a web that both thrilled and terrified her because she knew that being swept away by emotion always came at a price, and hers was only just beginning to be counted. Clara began noticing subtle changes in Liam as well. He sometimes seemed hesitant, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes that hinted he too was aware of the precariousness of their situation, that the excitement they shared was mingled with fear, and that the more they allowed themselves to feel, the higher the stakes became. Despite the tension, she could not resist the pull of their connection, the quiet moments where their eyes met across a table, where their laughter echoed softly in an empty hallway, where he asked about her life outside work with genuine interest, all combined to create an emotional intensity she had not experienced in years, a feeling that was simultaneously exhilarating and painful because it reminded her of everything she had at stake, the marriage she had vowed to protect, and the trust she had quietly broken. One evening, Clara went to meet Liam after work, hoping to share the small victories of a project they had completed, only to find that he was unusually quiet, distant in a way that made her chest tighten with worry, and as they sat together, the tension in the room was palpable. The silence stretched long enough that her mind began to race with every possible scenario, each one more terrifying than the last, and she realized that their connection, as thrilling as it was not immune to the consequences of the choices they had made. "I need to think," Liam finally said softly, his voice heavy with emotion, and Clara's heart sank, because she understood that what they had shared, what she had chased with such fervor, was now facing the reality of human complexity. Desire alone could not sustain a connection if fear, guilt, and responsibility were ignored, and she felt a deep ache in her chest as the consequences of her actions became undeniably real. That night, as she drove home through quiet streets, the city lights blurred by her tears, Clara replayed every interaction, every smile, every touch, and she realized that in chasing the spark of something new, she had not only risked the life she had built with David but also found that the thrill of passion was not a shield against the weight of regret, that love was fragile, and that choices once made had a way of reshaping the heart in irreversible ways. Returning home, David greeted her as he always did, his eyes warm, filled with the unspoken trust and devotion he had offered for years, and Clara felt a pang of sorrow so sharp that she could hardly breathe, knowing that the love she had taken for granted was still there, steady and true, yet she had wandered emotionally to a place that he could not reach, to a place where longing and temptation had overpowered the simplicity of their shared life. She spent that night in restless thought, replaying the events with Liam, trying to rationalize her feelings, to convince herself that she could manage both worlds, that excitement could exist alongside stability. But deep down she understood that this was impossible, that hearts do not belong in two places at once without consequences, and that the path she had chosen would demand a reckoning sooner or later. In the following days, the tension between desire and responsibility intensified. She found herself drawn irresistibly to Liam, seeking moments of closeness, subtle touches, and conversations that carried weight beyond words, and yet, the emotional pull came with guilt, a sharp awareness that David's love was being tested, that their home life was slowly fraying at the edges, and that she alone had set the conditions for heartbreak, whether she wanted to admit it or not. As she navigated office interactions with Liam, each smile, each fleeting look, each word carefully chosen to maintain a facade of professionalism became a game of balance, a careful dance where one wrong move could unravel everything. And yet the pull of human connection, the allure of someone who made her feel alive and understood, proved stronger than reason, leaving her caught in a storm of emotion that was at once thrilling and devastating. Clara realized that Liam, too, was wrestling with the consequences. He sometimes hesitated, his expression thoughtful and serious, a reminder that passion alone cannot solve the complications of human relationships, and that both of them were entangled in a web of emotion that demanded careful navigation, yet the temptation of connection remained irresistible, leaving both hearts vulnerable to mistakes they could not undo. One night, after a long evening at work, Clara lingered longer than she should have, wanting to share a quiet moment with Liam, to feel the warmth of his presence, the comfort of someone who saw her completely, only to be met with a subtle withdrawal, a distance that made her heart ache, a silent message that passion without clarity could not survive unscathed, and that the consequences of choices made in longing could ripple through every aspect of life, leaving both joy and heartbreak. intertwined. She left the office with a heavy heart, the night air cool against her skin, replaying every word, every glance, every touch, and wondering if the spark she had chased was worth the chaos it had caused. If the emotional fire she had ignited could survive the storms of guilt, responsibility, and the reality of the love she had risked. The weight of her choices settled over her like a silent companion, a reminder that love is as much about care, stability, and trust as it is about passion, and that the thrill of desire is never without cost, and Clara knew, with a mixture of sorrow and understanding, that the life she had once known was now irrevocably changed, that hearts could be led astray even when intentions were innocent, and that the consequences of her pursuit were unfolding in ways she could neither control nor ignore. That night, as she lay in bed beside David, his gentle breathing a comfort she could no longer fully embrace, Clara realized with clarity and an aching sense of loss that the spark she had chosen over the life she had built had consequences far beyond her imagination, consequences that would shape not only her heart but the hearts of everyone she loved. And she understood that desire alone is never enough to sustain a life, and that love, true love, requires careful tending, patience, and sacrifice, lessons she would carry forward as she faced the emotional fallout of the choices she had made, standing at the crossroads of longing, regret, and the uncertain path that lay ahead. Clara woke that morning with a heavy heart, the events of the past weeks replaying relentlessly in her mind, every choice, every fleeting smile, every touch from Liam, every quiet word with David, colliding into a whirlwind of regret, longing, and clarity, and she realized that the thrill she had chased so fervently now felt like a distant echo compared to the life she had risked losing, that the spark she had once believed was irresistible had begun to show its limitations, and that passion, without trust and stability, could only lead to heartbreak, a truth she now faced with stark and painful awareness. And yet she also recognized that love, even complicated and strained, could endure if met with honesty, courage, and the willingness to confront consequences rather than hide from them, a lesson she had to embrace if she wanted to salvage the life and relationships she had almost thrown away. The day began like any other, but the tension that had filled the past weeks was replaced with a heavy stillness, a quiet understanding that decisions had to be made, and as she walked into the office, she noticed Liam immediately, his usual charm subdued, his eyes thoughtful and distant, a shadow of the excitement they had once shared now evident in the way he held himself, and Clara's chest tightened because she understood, without words, that he too was grappling with the reality of their actions, that the warmth between them was no longer enough to shield them from the consequences they had created. They exchanged a quiet greeting, neither wanting to speak first, each feeling the unspoken weight of shared experiences that had been thrilling but now seemed fragile, and Clara realized that desire alone could not sustain a connection built on secrecy and longing. The thrill she had pursued came at a cost she could no longer ignore, a cost that had begun to erode not only her peace of mind but also the trust of the man who had stood by her for years. As the day wore on, Clara's thoughts drifted repeatedly to David, to his unwavering patience, his gentle gestures, his quiet support that she had taken for granted while chasing a fleeting spark, and she felt a deep ache in her chest, a sorrow that made her realize how much she had jeopardized the life they had built together, the home, the laughter, the simple routines that had once been comforting and now felt fragile, like glass that could shatter under the weight of her actions. By mid-afternoon, Clara knew she could no longer avoid the inevitable confrontation, the necessary conversation, the moment where she would have to face both men with the truth of her choices, and the thought made her stomach knot with fear, knowing that honesty would bring pain, disappointment, and perhaps even finality, but also recognizing that living in avoidance was no longer an option, that courage demanded she confront the consequences head-on, regardless of how painful the outcome might be. That evening, she drove home with her mind racing, rehearsing the words she would say, the explanations she could give, the apologies she needed to offer, and the quiet certainty that some bridges might be burned, some relationships irreversibly changed, yet also understanding that integrity required facing reality, not hiding behind excuses or fleeting emotions, and that the heart she had divided so recklessly now demanded clarity, responsibility, and reflection. David was waiting, as he often was, his expression calm but carrying an undercurrent of concern, the quiet worry in his eyes immediately setting Clara's heart racing with both guilt and sorrow, and when she finally began to speak, her voice trembled slightly, recounting the emotional turmoil, the connection with Liam, and the choices that had led her to this painful juncture, every word heavy with honesty, every sentence a step toward confronting the consequences she had so long avoided. David listened quietly, his gaze steady, his breathing even, and though her heart feared anger, rejection, or devastation, what she saw was a mixture of sadness, disappointment, and a profound sense of hurt that spoke volumes about the depth of his love and the weight of her actions, and Clara felt a wave of remorse so intense that she could hardly breathe, realizing that her pursuit of a fleeting spark had threatened the life and love that had been her foundation, the life she had risked, and the man she had betrayed emotionally, even if unintentionally. After a long silence, David spoke softly, explaining how deeply he had loved her, how committed he had been to their life, and how the choices she had made had shaken the trust and stability they had built together, his words both gentle and piercing, a mixture of truth, love, and hurt, and Clara realized that this was the moment she had feared most, the reckoning she had postponed, yet it was also an opportunity to reflect, to learn, and perhaps to rebuild if she approached it with humility, honesty, and unwavering effort. In the days that followed, Clara faced the complex reality of the aftermath. Liam, recognizing the consequences of their connection and the impossibility of sustaining it without causing further pain, chose to distance himself, creating a space that was difficult for Clara to navigate emotionally, because she had believed, even fleetingly, that passion could overcome everything. And now she had to confront the truth that desire, excitement, and sparks alone are not enough to sustain meaningful, lasting relationships, a realization both painful and liberating. She spent long evenings reflecting on her choices, on the pull of excitement versus the stability of love, on the emotional intensity she had experienced with Liam and the quiet devotion she had taken for granted with David, and in that reflection, she began to understand the fragile balance between longing and responsibility, between passion and trust, and the delicate way the heart must be tended to preserve both joy and stability, and Clara realized that her mistakes, while painful, were also lessons that could guide her toward a deeper understanding of herself and of what it truly means to love responsibly. Slowly, she began to reconnect with David in small ways, moments of conversation, shared meals, gentle touches, and quiet laughter that reminded her of the life they had built together, the home they had nurtured, and the trust that, though strained, could still be healed with time, patience, and consistent care, and each small gesture became a brick in the foundation of rebuilding, a testament to the enduring power of commitment and the possibility of forgiveness when hearts are willing to reconcile. Clara also understood the importance of setting boundaries, of accepting that some connections, like the one with Liam, could no longer continue without causing harm, and that the excitement of emotional sparks must sometimes be set aside in favor of the deeper, steadier love that withstands challenges, disappointments, and human frailty, and she carried this understanding into her daily life, aware that the lessons she had learned were painful but necessary for personal growth, emotional maturity, and the preservation of meaningful relationships. Nights were quieter now, though still tinged with memories of choices made, and Clara often lay awake thinking about the journey she had taken, from the first spark of excitement, through the dizzying thrill of connection with Liam, to the sobering realization of consequences and the slow, deliberate work of reconciliation with David, and she realized that life, love, and human emotion are never simple, never linear, and that the heart's journey is often fraught with temptation, missteps, and opportunities for reflection, learning, and growth. She began journaling, writing down her feelings, acknowledging her mistakes, expressing gratitude for David's patience, and reflecting on the ways she could nurture her marriage moving forward, recognizing that true love requires effort, communication, and the willingness to confront difficult truths rather than escape into fleeting pleasures, and with every entry, Clara felt a small sense of release, a way to organize the tangled emotions inside her, and a step toward clarity, healing, and maturity. Weeks passed, and the slow rebuilding of trust began. Clara learned to communicate openly, to share her fears, to listen deeply, to value the quiet strength of a partner who loved her even when she had faltered, and in these moments, She discovered a renewed appreciation for the life she had almost jeopardized, for the stability, love, and unwavering commitment that she had too often overlooked in pursuit of a transient thrill, and she realized that the depth of love is measured not by excitement alone, but by resilience, forgiveness, and mutual dedication. Clara also learned to forgive herself, not in a way that ignored her mistakes, but in a way that acknowledged them and allowed her to grow, to understand that human hearts are complex, and that attraction and desire, while natural, must be balanced with integrity and empathy for those we love, and with this self-awareness came a sense of responsibility and emotional clarity, a guide for navigating future relationships with wisdom and care. One evening, as she and David shared a quiet dinner, talking softly about their days, laughing gently over small stories, and holding hands across the table, Clara felt a warmth she hadn't realized she had missed, a combination of relief, gratitude, and renewed love, and she understood that while the journey had been painful, the lessons had been invaluable, teaching her that the heart's most enduring satisfaction comes not from fleeting sparks but from steady, nurtured love that withstands trials, acknowledges mistakes, and grows stronger through challenges. Clara's relationship with Liam remained in the past, a memory tinged with both excitement and sorrow, a reminder of the choices she had made and the lessons she had learned, and she carried it not with bitterness but with understanding, a guidepost that reminded her of the delicate balance between longing and loyalty, between desire and responsibility, and the importance of making conscious, thoughtful choices in matters of the heart, lessons that shaped her into a more compassionate, aware, and resilient person. As months passed, the emotional storm settled into a steady rhythm. Clara and David rebuilt their connection, layer by layer, conversation by conversation, smile by smile, and in that process, Clara discovered a depth of love that was patient, enduring, and profoundly satisfying, a love that could weather mistakes, missteps, and human imperfection, and she realized that while temptation and passion may visit the heart, the enduring joy of life and love comes from commitment, empathy, and the willingness to face consequences with courage and honesty. Clara often thought back on the journey, from the first spark of excitement with Liam, through the emotional turbulence, the intense longing, the guilt, the heartbreak, and finally the clarity, healing, and reconciliation with David, and she understood that the path of the heart is rarely straight, often messy, but ultimately rewarding when navigated with awareness, responsibility, and love, and as she lay beside David at night, feeling his steady heartbeat, she whispered silently, "I will never take this for granted again," knowing that life had taught her its hardest but most important lesson: love is precious, fragile, and worth every effort to protect and nurture.